Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now today's host, Chris Lang.
Perhaps you know someone who is divorced or going through a divorce presently. Or maybe that person is you. Maybe you've become that statistic that happens to someone else. Experts say that between 40 and 50% or more of all married couples will become divorced at least once at some point in their lives. Sadly, on average, first-time divorces occur around age 30 after just 7 years of marriage. For young adult Christians, the shock and pain may be even worse than for unbelievers due to expectations we had of ourselves and our now ex-spouses, as well as the social changes that occur immediately thereafter. Hello, my name is Chris Lang, and I'll be your host today on our program entitled Hope After Divorce. Our purpose today is to discuss the challenges faced after divorce, including personal stories by our young adult guests today. Their testimonies will inspire you to hold on to hope because Jesus knows your pain and your individual situation today. And sometimes that's all you need to know. If you find this program helpful and want to share it with someone, just visit our website at hopeonfire.org, and there you can download a free video or audio version of today's broadcast. I want to introduce our guests on our program today in the studio, my contributing editor, Lyris Bacchus-Steuber, and she is a master's level counselor, marriage and family counselor,
Yes.
practicing here in Central Florida. It's always great to have you on our program, Lyris.
I'm glad to be back, Chris.
And we have two special guests today. Jessica Hamilton lives right here in Central Florida, and she's been here for a number of years, and just really glad to have you on our program today, Jessica.
Thank you.
Also, Erwin Velbis. Erwin is a nurse anesthetist. He has 2 children, and really looking forward to your testimony today, Erwin.
Thanks for the invitation, Chris.
Let's talk about, this is such a timely topic for young adults, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
It's a shock to our system with the broken dreams, the shattered family units, the sense of stability, and lost identity. So I want to hear from each of you, how old were you when you got married, Jessica?
I was 21 when I got married, and I was 31 when I got divorced.
So you were married about 10 years.
Yes.
Erwin, how about you?
Also 21.
And married how long?
18 years, Chris.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yes, indeed. By today's standards, perhaps.
Yeah. A long time when you're 21 with a lot of dreams in your head, right?
Most definitely.
Signing up, that wasn't what you signed up for. And I want to hear from both of you as we kind of get into our conversation. For Christians, the added burden of guilt that we're not godly enough to save our marriage is particularly devastating, I think. For many believers, it feels like both a moral and a spiritual failure. For both of you, this wound is fairly recent. So I'd like to hear from you guys. At the moment you realized your relationship couldn't be fixed or salvaged or redeemed, whatever term you want to choose, where were you at that moment? How did you feel? Let's start with you, Erwin.
Well, as you said, that 18 years is a long time. But it seems like after 7 years, after you made it past that point, you feel like the love that you're sharing at that point is pretty much indomitable. And as a Christian, as long as you keep Christ as the center, then your marriage should thrive. But unfortunately, after several years of life's distractions and 2 houses, 2 cars, 2 children.
A lot of stress.
A lot of stress, yeah. Sprinkled with a little insidious resentment. I had received a notice from the clerk of the county court that my wife wanted to end our marriage. And the papers that I was holding in my hand that I was looking at, it felt like I'd been delivered a lead balloon.
Sort of an out-of-body experience?
Very, very much so.
Not happening to you?
Exactly. That's why I was in total shock. In the months that ensued after that, I was watching my life implode around me and sought to escape the pain. And I did so by filling the rent in my heart with another life's distraction called work. And I needed something to affirm me, something to kind of restore my manhood, if you will, and something that I felt good at. So I really threw myself into the work.
Well, I want to talk more about that when we start talking about social changes and other impacts of dealing with depression. I want to hear from Jessica now. Where were you at that moment when you knew in your spirit that it was over?
For me, I realized when we were hurting each other in small ways, in big ways, and unknown ways, that it was time to maybe reflect on, is this really where I want to be? And it was extremely hard because I was living out of state, and to make that decision to not know where I was going, I did come home, and it was hard. It was hard.
Well, a lot of social changes, a lot of social impact, financial impact, and depression. Lyris, their stories as far as the expectations. What do you think about the issue of more divorces among Christians versus non-Christians? And you're in private practice, so you see this often. What are your thoughts on unhealthy expectations by Christians when they get married?
Well, I think that is a factor, Chris, and the fact that more Christians are getting divorced is a staggering fact. And we ask that question, why? Shouldn't we trust God? Shouldn't we believe in the principles in the Bible, what God says? But oftentimes we don't. There are many things that God hates, and He mentions them in the Bible, and He hates divorce. And sometimes we don't hate it enough. We don't hate it enough to hang in there and to not selfishly want what we want, and not die to self, and not do what's best for our spouse or for our marriage. But as far as those unreasonable expectations, I think, yes, sometimes Christians going to marriage thinking that everything's going to be fine, and it doesn't necessarily always end up that way.
You mentioned, Erwin, about the sense that several years into your marriage, being a believer and being a Christian, your marriage, your relationship with your wife seemed impossible. It wasn't even a thought in your mind that there could be any risk of it ever failing.
I felt that it was
impervious. Didn't you say it was about 7 years after you got married? It just seemed like you were on cruise control, and there was no sense of danger.
No, I felt I was fairly immune.
And you said something I thought was insightful. We slowly grew apart, you said. Yeah. In that process of making a life together, somehow we end up to the point where these walls are built slowly, aren't they, over time? Sometimes imperceptibly, little hurts build. Resentments grow. I heard you mention that as well.
Yes.
And even Christians. We're humans, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Those things happen to us as well as with non-believers. And so I want to talk a little bit about now as we start to unpack this. Social life. You started going through the process. How was it affected for you? Jessica, how did it start for you?
Mine was completely changed because I was married here in Florida, but I moved away for a couple years. And so I left my sister and her family, and I left my friends behind and moved back home in with my parents. And, that was great, but my social circle changed because living down here and being married, we had married friends down here and not as many single friends. And moving back and being single, I was in a totally different place than my friends are now.
And isn't it true, Lyris, when you get married, your social structure changes? You find that most of your friends are married friends?
Of course, and you become a part of couple groups, and you do things together as couples or as family. So when you become single again, you have to sometimes find yourself again and find your own identity, because for some people, their identity has been wrapped up in their marriage. And hopefully, luckily, you do have, single friends or people that are sensitive in your social circles that will reach out to you and love you and support you.
Erwin, how about you? Social changes after your divorce?
Well, unfortunately...
During and after?
During the process, I really had succumbed to a kind of a bone-deep denial. And I checked out. As I said, I used work as a means to kind of fill the hole. And
So you worked many more hours, and you found yourself withdrawing. We're going to talk about the isolation, I guess, pulling away from church even.
Definitely, yeah. Of course, I was dealing with a lot of feelings of anger, and as that was coming out, I was seeking just ways, avenues to hopefully help me deal with the pain, or actually not even deal with it.
So we have those impacts, financial impacts as well. Both parties, both men and women, find a major readjustment, realignment in their finances. And when we get to the steps, the recovery road is what we'll call it, later on after the break, we'll talk about trying to get people to help you focus on making clear financial choices as you go through these changes. But let's talk before the break. How would you think that trauma affects men in divorce is similar and different between men and women? Lyris?
Well, just to hear you guys' testimonies, it just shows the difference between men and women. For men, they have a tendency to get depressed just like women, but their depression manifests itself more in isolation. Or men have a tendency to rebound, have more quicker rebound relationships with women, to feel that loneliness that they may have. They may become addicted more so or more quickly to things like alcohol, or sex, or sexual pornography, or things like that. And for women, they experience depression, those periods of tearfulness, crying, loss of hope and sense of self, loss of self-esteem.
And so even though women are typically more connected in their social circles than men, because they're more relationally wired than we men are in general, and we can't say that's always true, but in general, you said yesterday when we were planning that the depression is still there, even though they're socially connected. That seems kind of hard for men to understand.
It is, yeah. For women, the depression is still there. Even though they may have more friends than men do, they still feel that sense of failure, that loss of identity. For a lot of times for women, their identity has been wrapped up in the husband, and so they feel lost. Yeah.
Well, we also have the issue of talking with children about going through these kinds of, the divorce issue impacts children in a big way. And I know, Lyris, you've done a lot of counseling of children, of broken homes. And also we'll hear a lot more after the break from Erwin as it relates to your children and what you went through, what they went through, and how you were learning in that process together. You're listening to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. We hope you'll stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. We are here talking about hope after divorce, and my guests today are Jessica Hamilton, Erwin Velbis, and our contributing editor, Lyris Bacchus-Steuber.
Yes.
Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing today. We were talking before the break about social church life being affected, and wanted to touch on something to affirm people that are out there listening today. Because we were talking in planning for this program that coming back to church can feel pretty awkward. Even if you have a divorce recovery group, even if you've been plugged into support, I've heard this from many people, women and men, that you almost feel like you have a capital D on your forehead, the big divorce D on your forehead. Did you feel that way coming back, either of you?
Definitely.
At times?
At times, yes.
Erwin,
as I looked around, I remember feeling like piercing eyes, like they were fault-finding. Typically, I guess, among culture today, the man is usually the bad guy. And I felt like my character was being attacked.
Or maybe your own spirit was allowing you to perceive things in a way that maybe wasn't healthy while you were in that state. And that's why I want to affirm people today, if that's where you are, I think you brought up the comment, faking it till you make it.
Yeah.
There's some wisdom in that. We may not feel overly spiritual going to church when we're in that valley of the shadow of death, and we're going to talk about that in our Recovery Road steps, but isn't there value in making yourself put one foot in front of the other, Lyris, and going to church, even if you don't feel overly spiritual?
Even if you don't feel overly spiritual,
or you
don't feel like it, but that combats the isolation and depression that you may be feeling, because it's important that you connect yourself to God, and you also connect yourself to people. You may come across some people that may not be as sensitive as they could be by comments or looks or whatever, but not all Christians are going to be that way, and not everyone is going to treat you that way.
Well, let's get right into Recovery Road principles and steps. This is found from a little booklet called Healing the Wounds of Divorce, which was really helpful for me as I looked at just 5 helpful things that people can take away from this program today. And I want you each to be able to kind of give your personal feedback as we get through each of these steps. The first one, a really important one, be realistic, be honest with yourself. I was reading that some people aren't willing to even really verbalize the fact that they're divorced, and they'll go around and say, hey, I'm just between relationships. Is honesty a big deal, Lyris?
Honesty is a very big deal, and it also coincides with the stages of grief that you have to go through when you go through a divorce, and that would be denial. So you have to break through that barrier and just learn how to accept reality for what it is.
And we'll go through those steps, stages of grieving here in just a second. Being honest with your kids, being realistic with your kids. How do you do that, Erwin? You've got 2 children. How was it for you when you realized that you were in that place and your kids have one heart but 2 homes? I heard you share that earlier.
Well, first of all, I was pretty much wrapped up in my own feelings of wreckage, and it took a while before I realized that my children were probably experiencing the same amount of sense of loss, perhaps even abandonment, and they're bereaving as well. So I began helping them with their healing process, and by just listening to them and affirming what they have to say, and making them feel valuable.
And that's very important. I'm glad to hear that you did that, because just being there and just being honest with them that, hey, we're all grieving together. Yeah. Telling them the truth and telling them it's not their fault, that they're still loved by both parents.
So that's a crucial thing, isn't it? Don't the children oftentimes feel that somehow they're to blame?
Oh, yes.
That if I was just a better kid, maybe it wouldn't have fallen apart like this? Second thing, by the way, for you, Jessica, being real and being honest with yourself, was that difficult? Did you find yourself finding a hard time seeing yourself as being a divorced person at first?
In the beginning, yes, it was hard, but I think what made it easier for me was actually being a couple states away. It was difficult, but you never want to admit to yourself that you're divorced or going through it.
Now, we talked about the stages of grieving a minute ago, Lyris, and you're going to break those down briefly for our listeners. This idea that men don't cry, this idea that we're strong, and not really, that we shouldn't really embrace the pain. And that, I think, feeds into the idea of the addiction of working too much and things like that. And sometimes we can miss out until loneliness taps us on the shoulder and says, you haven't processed me yet. It's time to grieve. And what does it look like, Lyris?
Well, you have to go through these stages, and the first one that I mentioned is denial, and you're in that stage where you're like, okay, this is not happening to me. I'm just going to keep myself busy and not think about it because I don't want to experience the pain, and that goes for men and women. So you have to move through that and move past that. You have to get through the stage of depression. Everybody, like we talked about, men and women experience depression in different ways. And then anger. I heard you mention anger, and for men, sometimes they internalize it and then it may come out in different ways or negative behavior patterns. And you have to be able to share with God your anger, share with others your anger, and find ways to externalize that, to exercise, and to try to stay healthy as much as possible. Because for women, you may experience a loss of appetite, and for men and women, you may have problems sleeping or things like that.
And I think the important thing for people to remember today is that the stages of grief don't always. Did you get to acceptance yet?
Yep, that's the next one, and you eventually get to that place when you're able to look at the relationship and look at the positives and the negatives and say, you know what, there is hope. I can move on. I can live.
And isn't it true, Lyris, and for all of us here, I think all of us have been through failed marriages here around this table. Isn't it true that we can go through the stages of depression and then at some point we can bounce between the different stages?
Absolutely.
So we're not going crazy if we feel anger after we've already processed it. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Absolutely. We can bounce back and forth. And for each person, it's an individual timeline as far as how long it takes for you to heal. For me, I remember when I got divorced, I was divorced for 2 years, and I still couldn't listen to love songs on the radio because I would cry. And I would say, well, I should be over this by now. And I wasn't.
Any quick comments from you guys on that? Stages of grieving. Did you bounce around between the different stages, or did you sense that you were kind of going through the normal?
Certainly, I did bounce back and forth, but I find it very interesting that some of the codes of conduct for men that seem to be reinforced both subtly and maybe not so subtly in our culture, those codes of conduct seem to isolate us even more and make us feel even more lonely. I mean, the very reason why we don't want to feel that, and so. And that's just because I think men always feel like they have to be in control.
You mentioned now that you're beginning to come out of the fog in your own life, that you're ministering to people at work who are going through this divorce valley, and sometimes you just want to shake these people you mentioned because they're not willing to open up and be vulnerable enough to begin that process of grieving.
Definitely.
So that's a good point, Erwin. The next point, third point, take time to adjust to new patterns of living. We've mentioned that, during this stage we might not be focusing very clearly. There's a lot of things that we're having to reorganize, finances, et cetera. And it's okay to ask for help at this stage and getting organized. I know that after my divorce, just getting my house organized in a way that almost felt like a safe place, a safe space where I could breathe spiritually and emotionally. And for kids, they need continuity. I heard you mention that previously, Lyris. Boundaries.
They need boundaries. They need structure because emotionally they may be feeling out of control. So trying as much as possible to have the same sort of schedule, activities that they're used to doing is very important. And they need to know what's expected of them. That they can't just manipulate mom or dad just because mom or dad are going through this hard and difficult time. So yes, they need boundaries.
The fourth point is so important, and that is turning to God. Probably of all 5 steps, of any of them is the most important of all, because unless we recognize that God is there with us, it doesn't matter how many different support groups we go to, because it's only God that heals us in the end. When I was in a divorce recovery class, there was a text that was shared that really resonated in my spirit. Psalms 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Well, I never thought of it in terms of divorce before. The shadow is not death. It's just a shadow. But when we go through divorce, it feels like death, and we can't see past it. So for those of you today that are listening, remember the shadow is just a shadow. It's not death. You're going to live past this if you can turn to God. Last item, in the little bit of time we have left, seek help and support from others. So many people try to help, but there's not enough structure in those environments. We have 30 seconds, Lyris.
The best resource I can say for people that are going through a divorce would be a divorce care group. You can check out that website at divorcecare.org or call their 1-800 number, 1-800-489-7778. It's a biblically based divorce care program that churches put on in your area, and just call or get on the website and you can get plugged in to that.
Great. Well, I want to thank Jessica and Erwin and Lyris for joining me today on this vital program. You know, we've really just scratched the surface today on this subject. To find resources for further study, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. And as always, we appreciate hearing from you. Please send us your comments or prayer requests. You know, some people say that time heals all wounds. I say no, only Christ heals all wounds. Divorce is not an event in the courtroom, but a process of recovery. And you must walk through the valley of the shadow of death, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day at a time. No matter how desperate, guilty, or lonely you may feel now, if you can accept the challenge of beginning anew, you are sure to come to a deeper understanding of yourself and the tender mercies of our God. In God's strength, in fact, you can see yourself as a strong, viable, and sound person. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 proves that. And then you'll be able to close the door on this painful part of your life.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.